Family dinner sounds like clinking forks and polite laughs, but tonight the loudest thing at that table was a glow, her phone lighting her face a shade I hadn't seen in months. Her laugh didn't belong to the room, it belonged to whoever lived on the other side of that screen. I could feel the chair pressing into my palms, the knot in my jaw I'd been training to relax. Her brother was mid-joke, her mom halfway to a sip, and I was done pretending I didn't know the difference between a joke in the room and a joke online. I didn't make a speech. I didn't clear my throat. I just looked at my wife and let the air thin around us. Choose now, our marriage or him. Silverware paused. Her mother froze with a fork in the air. Her dad's eyes shifted to me like he'd been waiting to hear a man say something honest. The screen kept glowing in her hand, and for the first time in a long time, the whole room finally looked at her. I'm Michael Carter, 40, the kind of man who fixes a squeaky hinge before anyone asks. I clock in, clock out, and try to keep my promises heavier than my paycheck. I'm not fancy. I drive an older truck that knows every rattle on our street, and I keep a toolbox in the back because life breaks on Tuesdays, not weekends. I believe in showing up, at work, at Little League, at the table. Somewhere along the way, I started feeling like a guest in my own house. You can sense it when your hello lands short, when your story gets parked in the slow lane. I kept telling myself it was a season, the kind every marriage rides out. Tight money, tired bodies, long days. Still, I could feel something loosening that wasn't a hinge. Tonight, at that table, the noise of small talk felt like cover fire. I wasn't planning a war, I just wanted the truth to step into the open. We were close enough to pass salt, but far enough to feel like neighbors. That's the kind of distance that sneaks up in good houses with decent curtains. You still do the rituals, kiss on the cheek, how was your day? But the answers turn into weather reports. I'd lean in to share a joke from the shop, and she'd smile like a polite cashier. When you're 40, you know the look of a full heart and an empty room. Tonight, I felt both. Her brother was retelling the same casserole story for the 100th time, and people laughed because that's how families forgive being bored. I kept nodding and offering seconds, but every nod felt rented. It wasn't that I wanted fireworks. I wanted eye contact that didn't bounce. When her phone lit her face brighter than the chandelier, I felt my fork pause midair. I'm not a jealous man by nature. I'm a measuring man. And something wasn't measuring anymore. It started with small things you can dismiss if you're trying hard enough. Late-night texts with the screen angled away, a private smile that didn't check if I was in the room, the kind of laugh you save for a new story you're writing with someone else. She changed her lock screen, said she was just organizing, and I told myself not to be the husband who turns every password into a trial. We adults have jobs, deadlines, and people who need us. Nobody has time to chase ghosts in their own living room. So I learned to make coffee quietly and go to bed before she did. But tiny habits cast big shadows when the sun hits just right. I caught my reflection in the microwave door one night, jaw tight, shoulders up, a man rehearsing how not to be hurt. I put the cup down and told myself, she's tired, you're tired, and tired people laugh at small things. Except she wasn't laughing with me. One afternoon I grabbed her keys to move her car out of the driveway. The scent hit first. Sharp, clean, unfamiliar. Cologne, not mine. Not a sample card, not a store bag. It was sunk into the seatbelt like it had ridden shotgun. I sat for a minute with the engine off, listening to the garage hum like it had an opinion. Maybe it was from a crowded elevator, I told myself, or some coworker who thinks the office is a nightclub. I wanted to believe in elevators. The older you get, the more you realize the difference between a reason and an excuse is the size of the ache it leaves. I backed the car out slow, breathing like a man trying not to fog up his own story. I didn't confront her, not over a smell. You don't throw a marriage at the wall because your nose told you a secret. But I opened a drawer inside my head and wrote cologne on the first line. 2 weeks later, I was sorting mail at the counter when a crumpled receipt slid out of a grocery bag. Restaurant logo I didn't know, date night time, 2 entrees, her favorite dessert. Tip generous enough to signal chemistry. It was the kind of place we never went. Too loud, too trendy, too whatever we said when babysitters were scarce and energy ran low. I checked my calendar out of habit. That night, I'd been at a late call, sent her a text at 9, home soon. She'd replied with a heart. Funny how a heart can be both a hug and a bandage. I didn't storm down the hallway waving paper like a flag. People our age know that paper only proves what a voice confirms. So I slid the receipt next to cologne in the drawer in my head. It made a soft sound when it landed there, the sound of doubt getting organized. Dinner was in an hour. I washed my hands twice and couldn't get them clean. There's a special skill men learn when life gets tight. We narrate ourselves down from the ledge. You're being dramatic, I told myself while changing a light bulb that didn't need changing. You're tired, she's overwhelmed. People flirt with attention, not with intent. I listed bills due and promised to schedule a weekend away we couldn't afford. I remembered our first apartment, paint on my jeans and her singing off key while we argued about where the couch should go. Good memories make great alibis. I took a walk around the block after dark, the kind where you nod at neighbors and pretend your heart isn't sprinting. The truth is, suspicion makes you lonely even when you're holding a warm plate. I came back inside to the glow of her phone under the stairwell light. She laughed at something small and set it face down like you do with a secret. I decided not to make a scene. I decided to keep counting, not accusing. Counting always tells the truth. I wasn't snooping. I was trying to airplay a playlist to the TV when her photo roll popped up, the kind of accident software calls a feature. One thumbnail held too long on the screen. Her in that blue dress, a man's shoulder clipped into frame, his hand on the small of her back like a claim. Faces half hidden, but you can recognize a pose you're not invited to. The room went quiet in a way the TV couldn't fix. I stared until the screen timed out, then stood there with the remote like it might cross-examine me. Men in my age bracket don't faint. We catalog. I found my breath, sat down, and let the picture develop in the darkroom behind my ribs. That's when something in me stopped volunteering for confusion. I didn't want to throw words, throw dishes, throw 10 years into a bonfire. I wanted a choice on record, a moment clean enough that even memory couldn't smudge it. I powered the TV off and set the plan. That night, staring at the ceiling fan cutting slow circles, I made a promise that felt like tightening a bolt. I would not yell. I would not chase. I would give her a doorway big enough to walk through with the truth or with someone else. I pictured the table, the plates, her family, the way respect lives or dies in front of witnesses. Men my age understand that some statements have to be notarized by silence. I rehearsed one line until it fit in my mouth without shaking. If a marriage is a house, I'd been patching drywall for months. Now I would test the foundation with a single knock. No riddles, no traps, no guesses. Just the question any honest man asks when he's done renting his own dignity. Choose. I slept a couple of hours, maybe, and woke calmer than I deserved. The morning smelled like coffee and endings. I ironed a shirt because sometimes you dress up to bury what you loved. Her mother loves a full table, so the plan wrote itself. Sunday dinner, roast in the oven, weather on the TV with the sound down. I offered to bring rolls and arrived early enough to set out silverware straight. Families run on little routines. Who carves, who pours, who tells the same story about the broken sink. I smiled through all of it, not because I was faking, but because grief sometimes has manners. I could feel my lines sitting steady in my chest, like a level on a 2x4. The thing about being 40 is you learn to hear your heartbeat as a metronome, not a drum line. When her aunt asked about work, I gave the short version. When her brother asked about the truck, I said it's holding up fine. Across the room, Jessica laughed at her phone like it paid the mortgage. I checked my watch, not for time, but for courage. The table filled. The plates steamed. The stage, as they say, was set. If you've been married long enough, you can tell which smiles are house-made and which got catered from somewhere else. The one she wore belonged to a conversation I wasn't invited to. It hovered at the corners of her mouth, then brightened whenever her phone hummed. I kept pouring water, kept passing dishes, kept breathing through my nose like I'd practiced in traffic. Her dad watched me the way quiet men recognize each other. Small nods, big questions. I answered none of them. I was waiting for a moment clean of interruptions. Finally, her brother stalled mid-joke, her mother reached for the salad tongs, and Jessica's screen lit her face like a campfire story. I set my glass down on a coaster I'd made in our first year, back when we burned pancakes and called it romance. There's a sound a room makes when it knows the next sentence matters. I heard it, thin, expectant, almost kind. I looked at my wife and let the world narrow to a single lane. I didn't ask for a password. I didn't ask who he was. I asked for something smaller and bigger. My voice sounded like it came from a man who's done apologizing for making people uncomfortable. Choose now, our marriage or him. Silverware paused halfway to mouths. Her mother's hand hovered with a forkful of salad. Her dad's jaw tensed, then loosened like a verdict he wouldn't say out loud. The phone kept glowing in her palm, casting light on a table we both built. She stared at the wood grain, shoulders tight, and said nothing. Silence is an answer men my age recognize. I counted to 5 for patience and to 10 for mercy. She stayed quiet. That's when my wedding band felt like a barbell. I slid it free and set it between us. The clink was louder than it had any right to be. The room exhaled. I didn't. I just waited, giving her one last open door before history recorded who walked through. The room didn't go quiet so much as it locked. Forks hovered. Breathing turned thin. Her mother's wrist held a salad fork in midair like a photograph. I could hear the faint hum of the fridge and the old clock over the mantel stepping through seconds that felt like a trial. I kept my eyes on Jessica, not in anger, but like a man waiting for a train he can see on the tracks. If you're over 30, you know this feeling, when a family dinner becomes a witness stand and every chair turns toward the truth. I wanted one word, not a speech, not a story, just a word that would either build us or bury us. She looked at the tablecloth pattern like it had answers in the stitching. Someone cleared a throat and then swallowed it back. My hands were steady on the edge of the table. The worst part wasn't doubt. It was the way her silence started to sound like a plan. Richard, her dad, didn't jump in like TV fathers do. He's a man of hardware stores and Sunday football, the type who fixes a fence before it leans. He frowned, deep and measured, eyes moving between me and his daughter like he was lining up a level. He didn't defend her. He didn't condemn me. He held the space where truth belongs and let it echo. Older men know the cost of the wrong sentence at the wrong time. He set down his napkin with the kind of care you use at gravesides and new beginnings. My chest loosened a notch because someone else in the room understood what I was asking for. Respect in plain English. Jessica's phone buzzed once in her palm and the sound rolled across the table like a bad omen. Richard didn't look at the phone. He looked at her hands, the same hands he taught to steer. His silence didn't protect her. It dared her to stand up straight. Jessica's shoulders tightened under her sweater, a tremor that started at the base of her neck and moved like a shiver through old paint. She didn't meet my eyes. That hurt more than any name she could have said. I watched a tiny piece of her collapse inward, the way sheetrock dents when you lean on the wrong stud. You spend years learning your spouse's tells, the half smile that means later, the quick blink that means don't push. Tonight I saw a tell I'd never seen. Retreat. Her brother David stopped mid-smirk, the kind he wears when he thinks he's the funniest man in the room. He wasn't laughing anymore. If you're my age, you've lived through moments when the person you love shrinks right in front of you and you can't reach across the inches that used to be nothing. I gave her my face open and ready, like a door. She kept hers turned toward the safe fabric of the table. I counted to 5 for my own temper and to 10 for hers. My dad used to say, "Give people time to tell on themselves." At 8, I felt the old habit to rescue, slide a softer question across the plate, blame myself for asking too hard. At 9, I swallowed that habit like a pill I didn't need anymore. At 10, I understood the answer was already here. The older you get, the more you learn to read what isn't spoken. She didn't ask, "What do you mean?" She didn't say, "It's not what you think." She didn't even look up to place me above whatever campfire glow her phone provided. I could hear the air conditioner kick on and push a cool draft under my sleeves. I tell you the truth, the draft felt kinder than the woman across from me. I let 10 become 11 and 12, not because I was weak, but because endings deserve clean edges. My wedding band had always felt like part of my hand, the way a good tool vanishes when it fits the job. That night it felt heavy, like a socket that doesn't match the bolt anymore. I twisted it once, twice, then slid it free. The skin underneath was pale from years of shade. I set the band between us on the wood I had refinished our second summer. Oak that had carried birthdays, burn marks, and grace. The sound it made was small but final, a clink that landed in every chest around the table. No one breathed for a beat. If you're over 40, you know that small sounds can end big chapters. A latch, a click, the tear of a letter. I didn't throw it. I didn't dramatize it. I placed it like a receipt on a counter, paid in full. Jessica flinched as if it had bounced. It didn't. It lay still, and for the first time all night, so did I. Silence has a temperature, and it dropped 10 degrees. A shout would have warmed the room, given everyone something to push against. Quiet left nothing to argue with. Her mother, Evelyn, sniffed once and set her fork down carefully, the way you set a newborn in a crib. She stared at the ring as if it were a hot coin. I remembered the first time I put that band on. Nervous hands, bad dancing, the belief that love is louder than storms. Maybe it still is. But love's other voice is boundaries, and that voice never yells. It simply doesn't move. I could feel a tremor working its way through my arms like a distant train, the kind you hear before you see. I kept still. The loudest sentence in that room wasn't mine. It was hers, the one she chose not to speak. You learn after 30 that silence writes in ink. It was writing fast now, across a decade I thought we shared. The chair scraped back, a sound we'd made 1,000 times. Tonight it sounded like a verdict being filed. My knees didn't wobble, my hands didn't shake. I stood because men my age know the difference between making a scene and making a stand. Her plate still steamed. My water glass left a circle on the wood like a small moon. I didn't gather my things or reach for my coat. I let my body say what words had already done. I won't live inside your silence. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw David staring at his sister like he was seeing the scoreboard for the first time. There's a look families give when they realize a private story just went public. It isn't shame, it's weather changing. I wasn't angry, I was done. There's a holiness to done that older men understand. It's not quitting, it's honoring what you've already paid and refusing to tip for disrespect. David had always been the default comic relief, sarcasm for dessert, punchlines for seconds. He wasn't performing now. He looked at Jessica like a mechanic checking a crack that shouldn't be there. His mouth worked once, twice, and then he swallowed whatever he almost said. You don't need a translator to read family disappointment. It sits high on the cheekbones and pulls the eyes tight. He didn't glare at me. That mattered. He angled his body toward his sister like a man trying to remember who taught her better. I've watched men change their minds about me, at job sites, in waiting rooms, on ball fields, but there's nothing like watching a brother change his mind about a sister. He didn't defend her, he didn't accuse me. He stared at the ring and then at the phone still warm in her hand. I could almost hear the click in his head. This isn't a misunderstanding. This is a choice. Richard met my eyes. It wasn't a salute or a blessing, just a small nod. The kind men give across Home Depot aisles when they've both been through something heavy and don't have time for speeches. That nod kept me steady. It said, "You asked plain. You were owed plain back." In another life, maybe he would have barked, told me to take it outside, protected his child out of reflex. But fathers our age know that protection sometimes looks like truth, even when it bruises. He folded his hands, wedding band catching the light, and waited to see if his daughter would look up and claim her name. She didn't. The nod wasn't permission to leave. I didn't need that. It was recognition, the currency we trade when we're too old for games. I breathed once, deep enough to feel my ribs loosen. Then I turned toward the hall, where the photos of family vacations watched like patient judges. Evelyn's eyes were wet, not wild. There's a difference, and it matters. Wild tries to control. Wet understands it can't. She pressed a napkin to her lips and shook her head a fraction, not at me, but at the world that lets good kitchens host bad moments. She had set this table 1,000 times. Birthdays, Easters, the Tuesday nights that keep families alive. Now she stared at a ring on her wood and a daughter who wouldn't lift her face. I gave her one small nod for all the casseroles and rides and Christmas photos. I wanted her to know I wasn't here to humiliate anyone. I was here to end a confusion that had taken up too much space. She whispered my name like a prayer and then stopped herself, maybe because prayers are for saving, not undoing. If you're 60 and listening, you know this truth. Sometimes the kindest thing a mother can do is let the consequence sit. The hallway light spilled into the dining room like a path I hadn't used in years. I moved toward it with the easy steps of a man who finally remembered where he parked his backbone. I didn't slam anything. I didn't collect apologies on the way out. I passed the coat rack we'd bought at a yard sale our third year, crooked then, still crooked now, and thought about how some things never do hang straight. My hand brushed the doorframe and came away dusty. Funny what you notice when your heart stops juggling. Behind me, chairs creaked, but no one stood. That told me everything. I reached for the knob and paused long enough to give Jessica one last space to speak. That's grace, not weakness. I've learned grace costs, but it also makes clean exits. She didn't take it. Her phone buzzed again, a small insect of a sound. I turned the knob, and the cool air from the porch kissed my face like relief. On the porch, the evening felt honest. Crickets working overtime, a neighbor's screen door somewhere down the block, the kind of air that carries cut grass and unfinished conversations. The dining room light pooled behind me, warm on my shoulders, a sun I wasn't orbiting anymore. I didn't look back. Not because I'm hard, but because I finally chose forward. The gravel under my boots sounded like it had been waiting for this walk. My truck sat at the curb, steady as a friend who doesn't talk much. I opened the door and breathed the familiar. Old coffee, pine air freshener, the life I know how to drive. Through the window, I could see shapes moving at the table, people rearranging the pieces of a night they didn't plan for. I set both hands on the wheel and let the quiet settle. Inside, silence had punished me. Out here, silence felt like a promise. I turned the key and the engine answered like it always does. I pulled away slow, like a man easing a boat off a dock he built himself. The streetlights stitched the road in short, honest pieces. My chest felt hollow but not broken, more like a room after you've packed the boxes. I rolled the window down and let the cool hit the back of my neck. A neighbor waved without knowing why. I lifted 2 fingers off the wheel the way men do when words would make it worse. The dashboard clock glowed a time that didn't matter. The house shrank in the mirror until it was just another porch light. I've coached boys through hard innings. I've held my mother's hand in hospital waiting rooms. Leaving that driveway still ranked. I told myself what I tell the kids when the ball takes a bad hop. Square up, keep your eyes on it, and do the next right thing. The next right thing was distance. I turned onto the highway and let the lines do their job. There's a breath you forget you own until you take it. Mine showed up around mile 3. Night air filled the cab, cutting through the old coffee smell and the pine freshener that's been losing the fight since March. I didn't play music. The hum of tires on asphalt did the talking. Steady, reasonable, older than both of us. I thought about men I know who stayed because packing a bag felt like quitting. But I wasn't quitting. I was returning something that didn't fit, my dignity, to the place it belonged. The green exit sign for the industrial park slid by, then the one for the old ball fields. My hands loosened on the wheel. I could feel my shoulders drop from their perch near my ears. There's a lot people don't tell you about your 40s, how courage sounds quiet, and how peace sometimes uses the door marked escape. I cracked the window wider and let the wind push back whatever was trying to sit on my chest. The 24-hour diner still had the flicker in the end of neon, same as it did the year we pulled in after a movie and shared a plate of fries. I parked under the camera like I always do, and watched 2 line cooks smoke beside the dumpster, shoulders touching in the kind of silence men use when they're on each other's side. Inside, a handful of souls arranged themselves around bad coffee and good pancakes. I took a booth that had lost a spring years ago and ordered a mug I'd barely sip. The waitress called me Han without making it a performance. People our age appreciate that kind of skill. I wrapped both hands around the cup and let the heat tell my fingers I was still here. The jukebox coughed out a country song about leaving that somehow didn't make me roll my eyes. I stared at the sugar canister until the chrome turned into the face of a man deciding to keep his voice. Coffee cools faster than grief. Mine was cold by the time the song ended. The neon light jittered on the window, painting the table with tired red. I used to think neon made everything look cheap. Tonight it felt like honesty, harsh, unfiltered, not pretending to be sunlight. The board by the register advertised meatloaf Monday and senior discounts on Thursdays. Life keeps moving, even when your house is stuck. I refilled my own water because the waitress was slammed and I wasn't in a hurry. My father used to say you can judge a place by how it treats people at 2 a.m. This place offered coffee, silence, and a bill you could afford. That's mercy in my book. I pulled out my wallet, not for money, but to find the photo of us at the county fair. I looked at the younger man with sunburned cheeks and a woman leaning into his shoulder, and I said, quiet enough for only me, that man deserves a straight answer. The phone buzzed like a fly under a lampshade, persistent, aimless. I turned it face down and let it walk circles on the table. Old habits wanted me to fix, explain, soothe. New rules said I didn't have to turn someone else's choice into my homework. Folks over 30 learn this the hard way. Not every sound is a summons. I watched a trucker count bills from a rubber-banded stack and a nursing aide rub the bridge of her nose the same way my mother used to after doubles. We were all holding something we didn't sign up for. The phone buzzed again, and I pictured words I'd see if I looked. Please. Call me. We can talk. Talking without truth is just noise. I placed the phone on the seat beside me like you do with a tool you're done using for the night. The neon flickered, and the clock over the grill ticked a minute forward. I let it pass without investing in what it wanted from me. If you sit long enough, night steps back on its own. The window shifted from black to charcoal to a gray the color of old pavement. The first pickup of the morning crew rolled in, ladder racks rattling. I paid in cash and tipped heavy because people who work nights deserve somebody to notice. Outside, the air held that crisp moment before day remembers its chores. I stood by the truck and stretched, back popping in a way I'll feel at lunch. Clarity doesn't arrive with a trumpet. Mine came as a sentence that fit without splinters. Keep it simple. No speeches, no reruns. The sun hauled itself over the strip mall, and even the neon looked tired of pretending. I climbed in, set the phone on the dash, and watched the light catch the cracked corner of the case. Men in our bracket talk about when I knew. I knew now. Drive with your eyes open. Let the day come. Say what you mean, and stand there. Around 7:30, the phone lit up with her name. My thumb hovered out of muscle memory. I let it ring twice and answered, because refusing to pick up can turn you into the villain in someone else's story. Her voice came thin and scratchy, like a station out of range. Can we talk? Not, good morning. Not, I'm sorry. Just 3 words that used to be a bridge and now felt like a trapdoor. I told myself to breathe through my nose and keep my shoulders down. About last night, she added, as if last night were a barked order I could ignore. I looked at the diner sign going dark for the day shift and the promise of a sky trying to be blue. We can, I said, but not the way we used to. You can hear a throat close over the line. I heard it. Then the little inhale that means someone is about to sell you a smaller version of the truth. You had your chance, I said, careful as a man setting a glass on a counter he made by hand. In front of the people who taught you right from wrong, you chose not to use it. I didn't lace it with anger or lather it with kindness. I set it down plain. She said my name like it might unlock a hidden door in me. It didn't. She pivoted to the hits, stress at work, feeling alone, how I've been tired. Every note true, and none of it the melody. I stared at a jogger shivering in a hoodie and envied how simple his breath looked in the cold. I'm not yelling, I told her. I'm not blaming. I'm setting the size of the table. If you want to put truth on it, I'll sit. If you want to put excuses on it, eat without me. Silence held. I let it. Boundaries sound rude to people who benefited from their absence. She started to cry, the small sobs that used to call out the rescuer in me. Men my age know that reflex, how we sprint toward a fire with no plan to stop feeding it. I pressed the phone tighter and listened. Not to be cruel, to confirm. The words came between breaths. I'm scared. I messed up. Please don't give up on us. I believe the fear. I believe the regret. But regret without responsibility is a puddle. It looks like water and won't carry you anywhere. What do you want me to do with your silence? I asked. Frame it? Forgive it? Pretend it didn't decide for both of us? She didn't answer that, just went back to the softer songs. I put the phone on speaker and set it on the seat so my hands could be free to hold the wheel. I won't decide while you're crying, I said, and meant it. Then I ended the call, not as punishment, but as the first decision that belonged to me. The truck knew the way without asking. I took the old two-lane that runs past the feed store and the softball fields, then lifts through cottonwoods toward the lake. Every mile marker knocked dust off a memory. Our first picnic, the time the radiator steamed and we laughed because we couldn't afford the tow. The road was patched like a quilt sewn by someone who refuses to throw anything out. I respect that kind of stubborn. The lake came into view, a sheet of pewter under a sky trying hard to be kind. I pulled into the gravel lot where teenagers practice leaving and old-timers practice staying. The wind came off the water carrying the smell of mud and something like courage. I cut the engine and sat with the ticking of hot metal cooling. If you're over 35, you know the way places hold versions of you. I was coming to visit one of mine, a kid with a sunburn and a plan he thought was joint property. We used to sit on the hood of my car, shoes on the bumper, backs against the windshield, and talk like the future took reservations. She pointed at map lines like they were promised roads, and I nodded because love makes you brave with ink. We listed baby names we never used and argued good-natured about mountain towns versus ocean towns while we split a gas station sandwich. That night flickered back like a home movie, grainy, warm, a little crooked. I rubbed the steering wheel where my ring had worn a smooth spot over the years and thought about the men who raised me, quiet providers who didn't give speeches but always had jumper cables. They taught me a marriage is made of ordinary Tuesdays and clear yeses. I tried to give both. The wind kicked up and a crow skated across the water like it owned the place. For a blink, I wanted to go back. Then I remembered back doesn't exist. It landed with the dull certainty of a tool dropping into a drawer. Most of those plans were mine, not because she never agreed, but because I carried them when they got heavy, and she set them down when they got in the way of attention. That's not a crime. It's a pattern. And patterns make futures. I thought about the receipt, the cologne, the picture, and the silence that tied them together like string. If you've lived some years, you know the difference between a rough patch and an exit ramp. This wasn't rough. This was directional. I put the truck in drive and watched the lake shrink in the mirror the way the house had. Smaller, then small, then a fact I no longer had to solve. My phone sat face up on the dash, black and still. The road ahead wasn't smooth, but it was mine. I tightened my grip at 10 and 2, the way they taught us in driver's ed, and took the turn that would keep me honest. I pulled into the hardware store lot like I've done 100 times for screws, stain, the things that keep a house honest. Today I wasn't fixing wood. I was fixing the record. Inside, the air smelled like lumber and Saturdays. I walked past the power tools, tempting noise for a man who wants to drown feeling, and headed for the small stuff. Storage boxes, hasps, brass padlocks that click shut with authority. A teenage clerk asked if I needed help, and I almost laughed. Something that keeps what matters in and what doesn't out, I said, and he pointed me to aisle 9 like that was a normal question. I picked a metal box, plain, durable, the kind you can't mistake for decoration. At the register, my hands looked like my father's, steady even when the heart isn't. Back in the truck, I set the box on the passenger seat. It looked like an answer, not revenge, not theater, just an answer a man can hold. I parked behind the grocery store where the deliveries come in and opened the box on my lap. The hinge squeaked, new metal learning its job. From my wallet, I slid out the restaurant receipt, the one with 2 entrees and a tip generous enough to mean something. From the visor, I took the photo I'd printed at the pharmacy just to prove to myself I wasn't inventing things on a glare. I slipped my wedding band off and held it long enough to remember calloused hands on a summer night, our bad dancing and good promises. Then I laid the band in the box like a tool I used well until the job changed. I wasn't building a case to win an argument. I was assembling the truth so I wouldn't forget it when her voice tried to make it smaller. The lid fit snug. The lock clicked with a sound older men respect. Final, but not cruel. I breathed once and started the engine. Words matter when they're few. I tore a page from a pocket notebook I use for oil change mileage and measurements I forget by lunch. I wrote slow, the way you do when the sentence has to carry more than ink. This is what you threw away. No exclamation, no underline. I set the note on top of the ring, the receipt, the photo, and closed the lid. If you're over 35, you learn that sometimes a short line says what a sermon can't. I pictured myself showing up with paragraphs in pain, watched it go bad in my head, and let the picture go. The box wasn't a trap or a prop. It was a mirror that didn't argue back. I tucked the key into my front pocket next to a quarter and a drywall screw I'd been meaning to return to the bin. The quarter stayed. The screw stayed. The key pressed against my leg like a reminder. Finish the hard thing, then rest. The house looked the same from the street. Azaleas too ambitious for the soil. Porch light we never replaced with a softer bulb because life's busy. Jessica stood on the top step, arms wrapped around herself the way people do when they're expecting weather. I pulled in behind her car and killed the engine. My boots felt heavier on the walkway than they did last night. There's a certain gravity to coming home when home has lost its noun and kept only the adjective. She didn't rush down. She didn't run. She waited. That counted for something, even if it couldn't cash out. The screen door creaked the same as always when I opened it. "Can we talk inside?" she asked, voice small, house big. "No," I said. "This won't take long." I held the box with both hands because ceremony matters when you're ending something you started in a church. Her eyes dropped to the lock and then back to me, searching for a softer version of today. I set the box on the porch rail between us, oak worn smooth by years of grocery bags and Christmas lights. "What is it?" she asked, like we both didn't know. "Everything I don't need to carry anymore," I said. The key came out of my pocket like a coin you finally decide to spend. I placed it in her palm. We've traded a lot across that space. Mail, mugs, good news, once a goldfish in a plastic bag. Today I traded back my part of what we broke. Her fingers closed around the key, and for a second I saw our wedding day hands, young, shiny, naive in the best way. She set the box on the step, sat beside it, and turned the key. The lock gave. She lifted the lid like she was opening a letter she hoped wouldn't say what it said. People our age know the feeling. You want to stop time right before it confirms what you already learned the hard way. She saw the ring first and blinked like a flash had gone off. Then the receipt. Her mouth pulled into itself, smaller than I'd ever seen it. When she reached the photo, the sound she made wasn't a word. It was a caught breath and a dropped plan. She held the picture too tight, thumb whitening at the edge, as if pressure could erase a shoulder and a hand that didn't belong to me. "Where did you get this?" came out like a child who knows the answer but needs a different one. "Doesn't matter," I said, because the source never outruns the scene. The neighborhood had that late afternoon quiet where lawnmowers rest and sprinklers take over. I could feel eyes behind blinds, people who have held their own boxes and keys. I kept my voice even. "I didn't come to debate pixels. I came to return weight." She looked up for half a second, then back down into the proof that didn't care for excuses. She shifted to the first refuge people reach for when reality presses, shrinking it. "It didn't mean anything," she whispered, the words stacking like sandbags against a river that had already decided. If you're over 30, you've heard that sentence in one form or another. It's the cousin of, "It was just a joke," and "I was just tired." I could feel the part of me that loves her scanning for a way to believe it, not because it sounded true, but because believing would save me work. I let the urge pass like a truck on a narrow road. You hold still, let it roar by, then you keep driving. "Things that don't mean anything don't need hiding," I said. "They don't ask for new passwords or angled phones." I wasn't trying to score points. I was trying to make the ground solid under both our feet. She reached for my wrist and stopped halfway, as if the space between us had gained inches I didn't have the right tools to remove. "Then why hide it?" I asked, not with a prosecutor's heat, but with a husband's math. Her eyes went glassy and far, that stare people get when the truth is a bright light. "I was lonely," she said, and the word landed with a depressing familiarity. Loneliness is real. It's also a fork in the road. You reach for your spouse, or you reach for a shortcut. I ran my tongue over a back tooth and tasted coffee from a diner that doesn't pretend to be more than it is. "You could have told me you were drowning," I said. "You let me think the waves were my imagination." The blinds in the house across the street shifted a half inch. I didn't look. "I'm not the man who can fix what you won't name," I added. That line wasn't for leverage. It was to set the load limit for a bridge I'd carried too much on. She nodded like the word lonely had finally met its adult size. Someone's dog barked down the block and quit. A minivan drifted by with a kid in a booster seat singing to nobody. Life kept doing its unbothered job while we sat on a porch that had seen better Saturdays. I noticed the curtains move at Mrs. Green's next door, half an inch, the courtesy peak of a woman who has watered our plants and knows the difference between drama and danger. I didn't wave. I didn't care. You get to a point where the audience stops mattering because the stage is too heavy. Jessica slid the photo back into the box like she could return it to the store. "Please," she said, voice wearing down. "I don't want to lose you." There was a time when that sentence would have sent me rushing, arms open, fix-it tools clattering. I rested my hands on my knees instead, the way my coach taught us to breathe after a hard sprint. Forward, grounded, not promising anybody a miracle. "I don't want to lose you," she said again, slower, as if spacing the words might help. I thought about the man I am at work, patient with apprentices, clear about measurements, unwilling to pretend a bowed board is straight just because you wish it. "You already did," I answered, not to hurt, but to mark the line. Loss doesn't happen at the signature. It happens at the silence that forced it. Her face crumpled in a way that looked young and old at once, like a yearbook photo found in a box of bills. I wanted to reach out, and I didn't. That's a choice men our age learn to make. Compassion without self-abandonment. "If you meant to keep me," I added, "last night was the moment." The porch light clicked on with a timer we'd never reset for summer. It washed everything in that too bright yellow that forgives nothing. She covered her eyes. I let the light tell the truth for me. I stood and the boards answered with a groan I recognized. Wood and men both protest when you stop asking them to carry more than they should. I closed the box and set it gently in her lap. "Keep it," I said. "It belongs with the person who made it necessary." She clutched it like a life preserver in a shallow pool. "What am I supposed to do with this?" she asked. "Remember," I said, "and stop calling it small." A breeze pushed a dry leaf across the step and under the door, the kind of mess I would have swept by instinct. I didn't move. Some chores aren't mine anymore. She reached for me and found only air. It wasn't unkind. It was honest. I've learned honesty sometimes looks like leaving your hands by your sides. The key glinted in her palm. I nodded at it, and she looked down as if seeing it for the first time. Sometimes the smallest metal weighs the most. I took 2 steps backward before I turned, because I've discovered it's easier to honor a goodbye you witnessed than one you guessed at. The yard needed edging. The welcome mat needed replacing. My truck looked the same as it had yesterday, and nothing like it did. I heard the soft thud of the box lid as she closed it, and the quiet click of the lock reclaiming its purpose. I didn't rush the walkway. Boots on concrete made a measured sound, a man keeping time with himself. At the bottom of the steps, I paused long enough to feel the ache show up and be counted. Then I kept moving. There's mercy in motion. At the curb, I opened the door and let the familiar smell of old fabric and engine oil wrap me like a coat that still fits. I didn't slam anything. I didn't peel out. I put the truck in gear and rolled forward, leaving the porch to hold what it was given. Tom Reynolds didn't ask for the long version. He opened the door in a faded ball cap, pointed at the couch, and slid a cold beer across the coffee table like a man handing over a life jacket. His apartment smelled like sawdust and detergent. Simple, clean, male. We watched a late game with the volume low and let the play-by-play fill the spaces we didn't need to speak. Men our age understand that help sometimes looks like silence and clean sheets. Around midnight, he grunted, "You good?" I nodded because good means not alone when you're sleeping in a different zip code than your wedding vows. I stared at the ceiling fan until the room slowed down. In the dark, I heard Tom toss me an extra blanket and say, "You did the hard part." He meant leaving with my dignity. I pulled the blanket over my chest and realized something simple and shocking. I wasn't shattered. I was sore. Soreness heals. Shattered hides. Morning light found the room honest. No frames to straighten, no apologies to rehearse. Tom handed me a travel mug and a look that said, "Eat." We split a couple of breakfast tacos at the counter like we used to after softball. I caught my reflection in the microwave door, eyes tired, posture straight. "I'm not broken," I said without meaning to. Tom smirked. "Knew that last night." He tapped the counter with his knuckle. "She's the one who cracked." The word cracked landed right. Not evil, not monster. Broken choices, not a broken person. It let me be human and still be firm. I opened my notebook, the same one I use for oil changes, and wrote 3 lines. Call lawyer, box up essentials, text boss, taking 2 days. Men in our bracket have to keep the lights on even when the heart flickers. I rinsed my mug, stacked my blanket, and hugged Tom because some thanks don't fit in sentences. Then I went to make it official. Thomas Reed keeps his office like a man who respects Tuesday. No fancy art, just files stacked where decisions live. He listened without adding gas, then slid a yellow pad toward me. "We'll keep it clean," he said. "No character murder. Facts, timeline, assets, boundaries." I liked the word clean. It sounded like a floor you can walk across barefoot. We covered the basics: house, truck, retirement, the kind of details that get loud if you ignore them. He didn't promise victory parades. He promised paperwork that spoke for itself. "You don't have to explain her to me," he added. "Just document you." Men my age know the relief of a clear job. I handed over copies, the receipt, the photo, my note from the porch, without commentary. He nodded once, a mechanic hearing a familiar engine noise. "I'll draft," he said. "You'll review." I left with a folder and a calm that felt earned, like the quiet after finishing a tough, necessary chore the right way. 2 days later, I sat at Thomas's conference table with a pen that didn't feel like a weapon. Paper rustled, names printed, spaces waiting. My life reduced to lines that could still protect what mattered. My hand didn't shake. It surprised me. I've shaken signing for less. Mortgages, school forms, the time I okayed a surgery I prayed we'd never need. Today, I was steady. "You okay?" Thomas asked. "Yes," I said, and I meant it. Not happy, not numb. Okay. He walked me through the terms. Fair, honest. No torching the earth, just fencing the property. When the last page turned, I signed Michael Carter the way my father taught me to, legible and accountable. Thomas gathered the stack, squared it, and slid it into a manila envelope like a carpenter tapping trim into place. "Sunday," I said. "Her family will be there." He met my eyes. "Then Sunday is clarity." I tucked the envelope under my arm and felt lighter than I had in months. The Miller house smelled like roast and nerves. Same driveway, same wind chimes, same porch that had turned into a courthouse. Inside, chairs scrapped, voices practiced being polite. Richard nodded once. Evelyn's eyes were soft and red. David hovered near the fridge like a guard who lost his post. I set the envelope on the table and waited for the room to settle. Family photos lined the wall, beach trips, graduations, that Christmas where I wore the sweater her aunt still teases me about. I thought about how many ordinary Sundays keep a marriage alive, and how one can ask it to tell the truth. Jessica sat small at the end, fingers braided tight. "Say what you came to say," Richard told me, steady as a beam. I breathed in through my nose, out through my mouth, and kept my voice even. This wasn't a show. It was the last clear conversation I owed the people who had set this table 1,000 times. I slid the envelope to the center, palm flat, a habit from laying tile. "This is my choice since you couldn't make yours." The sentence landed and stayed. No one flinched. Jessica opened the flap with careful fingers and pulled out the papers like they might bite. The room heard the rustle. Her breath caught on the first page. "You're divorcing me?" she whispered, like the word itself was a cliff. "I gave you a door," I said. You stared at the floor. Evelyn covered her mouth. David stared at the grain of the table like he could sand it smooth. Richard's jaw worked once, then he nodded. Not at me, at the truth, which is different. "Is it true?" he asked his daughter. She didn't look up. "Yes." Silence held the room upright. I wasn't angry, I was finished. I set my house key on the coaster I'd made our first year and pushed my chair back. The papers stayed where they belonged, between the past we shared and the future I intended to live. Jessica broke the way a shelf breaks, quiet, then all at once. Tears, shoulders shaking, hands reaching for anything that would hold. "Please," she said, "not in front of them." I looked around the table that had watched birthdays and burnt rolls and all the Tuesdays that make a family. "This isn't about embarrassing you," I said. "It's about telling the truth where the lies lived." Older men in the room shifted like they recognized the tune. No solos, just a steady drumbeat of facts. She reached for my sleeve the way you grab a railing when the stairs surprise you. I kept my arm by my side. Mercy doesn't always look like catching. Sometimes it looks like refusing to help someone hide. "If it didn't mean anything, it wouldn't need the dark," I added. She folded into the chair, small, and the room breathed in together. The climax wasn't my volume. It was the way her silence finally admitted what my questions had measured. Richard stared at his daughter like a man reading a blueprint he didn't draw. No anger, just the gravity of a beam that won't hold. "Is it true?" he asked again, giving her one last doorway. She nodded without lifting her eyes. Evelyn cried into a napkin already damp with history. David leaned back, jaw tight, as if trying to swallow a lesson he wishes he didn't need. Richard turned to me and gave the smallest nod, the kind men trade over pickup beds and gravesides. "He's right to leave," he said, voice steady as a level set on fresh lumber. That sentence cleared the air like a storm finally choosing a direction. It wasn't permission. I didn't need permission. It was recognition. Truth notarized by someone who knows what keeping costs. Jessica looked up then, hunting for a softer ruling that wasn't coming. I stood, not with triumph, but with the calm of a man who knows the next right step and is done asking for applause. I set my house key on the coaster I'd made our first year, oak, nicked at the corner where we'd dropped a knife and laughed. The key looked wrong there, like a tool laid on a finished floor. "I won't drag this out," I said. "Dragging ruins good wood." It sounds silly, but men my age think in repairs. I pushed the chair back and let the legs creak their objection. Evelyn whispered my name, not to stop me, just to bless the movement. David stepped aside in the hall the way you do when a stretcher passes. At the door, I paused long enough to make sure I wasn't leaving from anger. Anger leaves you circling the block. Boundaries send you down the road. I opened it, felt the change in air, and stepped through. The door clicked behind me, polite, final. On the porch, the wind carried cut grass and the faint tin of a ball game 2 houses over. I followed the sound like a man heading toward his own life. 3 nights later, a knock found me at a modest hotel off the highway, the kind with ice machines that wheeze and a view of a parking lot that has seen more truths than churches. I opened the door to Jessica holding the metal box like a fire she couldn't put down. She looked smaller, as if regret had made her bones learn tighter angles. "Can I come in?" she asked. I let her step to the desk lamp and set the box on the table. She opened it, ring, receipt, photo, note, and winced as if they'd grown heavier. "I've read your sentence 100 times, she said, touching the words I'd written. "This is what you threw away." She tried on explanations like coats that didn't fit, stress, loneliness, stupid thrill. I didn't argue. Older adults know that arguing with a bruise just pushes the blood around. "I'm not here to debate," I said. "I'm here to be clear." The room hummed with the AC and the truth. She took a breath that shook, then another. "I'll spend the rest of my life wishing I had looked up that night," she said. It landed the way final words do, late but honest. There was a time when that would have cracked me open, sent me reaching for the old tools, fixing, forgiving, forgetting too fast. I kept my hands on my knees. "You had a good man," I said, simple as turning a screw. "You let him walk out alone." No thunder, no door slam, just a sentence built to carry weight without wobbling. She nodded, tears running clean paths through makeup that wasn't trying anymore. "I know," she whispered, and the box clicked shut like it agreed. We stood, 2 people at the end of a hallway that used to be our house. I walked her to the door and opened it to the honest air. She left with the box and the key. I stayed with the room and the quiet that finally felt like mine. The balcony wasn't much, metal rail, plastic chair, a view of taillights stitching the highway. But the beer in my hand was cold. the kind that tells your fingers they belong to you again. Dusk slid the sky from blue to bruised to honest dark, and the wind did that simple mercy older men appreciate. It carried away what didn't need to stay. Below me, life kept moving. Someone laughing by the ice machine, a truck downshifting toward tomorrow. I thought of small sounds that changed everything. The rings clink on wood, a father's sentence, a lock clicking shut on a box I no longer had to carry. I wasn't waiting for fireworks. Payoff at this age looks like steady breath, a spine that doesn't negotiate, and a road that points forward without apology. I lifted the bottle in a quiet toast to hard lessons learned on ordinary furniture. Sometimes the loudest choice is to stand up, put the ring on the table, and walk away. That's how I found peace.